Hello everyone, this is Jinx, one of the Monster Hunter math guys. So first off, spoilerinos, we are going to be talking about endgame weapons, which means endgame monsters, and also the background footage provided by our friend Rainy is going to be of an endgame monster. So yeah, spoilerinos and all that. Now off the bat, I want to establish we are not here to on you for using Hellish Slasher, nor are we here to talk about or attack any individuals. If you enjoy the weapon because it is a sexy longsword, then keep using it because this is a game, you're meant to have fun. And if I'm being honest, it's not that much weaker than other options. What we are here to do is to dismantle a lot of the community misconceptions we keep seeing surrounding the weapon. There are many things stated that are simply untrue, and we are here to numerically and mathematically dismantle that. This is not meant to be an opinion piece, and if anything ever is my opinion, I will outright state it. This is about combating rampant misinformation with facts. But before we get into that, a quick reminder. We do have a Twitter where we post updates about videos and just various random memes we make, and Tuna does stream almost every single day live on Twitch. Other than sharing our videos with your friends, following us on these two platforms is one of the best ways you can support us completely for free. Also, real quick, just to nip this in the bud, yes, in the background footage here, Rainy is not using a Master's Touch set. Now, I talked to Rainy about it, and it's not because it's better than the Master's Touch set, it's because Rainy was underfarmed and could not make a good Master's Touch set at the time. Which does make this 548 TA no clutch claw run much more impressive. Speaking of which, if you want to watch it without having all of these text boxes and graphs over it, check out Rainy's channel. Also be sure to subscribe because Rainy plans on dunking this with a proper Master's Touch set soon. Link in the top right and description. Alright, so Hellish Slasher. Now this is a long discussion, so before we get into it, I do want to address something that was brought up about our previous video about the meta longsword sets. Someone informed us that our meta set was missing a potential point of agitator in the build. Now we were aware of this build, in fact a variant of this is what Tuna runs for his SNS Master's Touch set, but we decided not to recommend it in the video. But why is this? Well, let's take a look at the set and analyze it. Now the reason why this can fit in an extra agitator is because it runs a high rank piece of armor, the Teostra Gamma Helm. Now the Teostra Gamma Helm versus the Teostra Beta master rank version does have an extra level 2 deco slot. Technically it loses a level 4 deco for the second level 2 deco slot, but we don't end up using that level 4 deco for anything other than combo decos anyway. Now this level 2 deco slot does let us fit an extra agitator in the build, but why didn't we recommend this set? Well, that's because you have to use a high rank piece of armor. Now keep in mind, this is an end game optimal set that also requires some god decos. At this point, you're probably exclusively farming tempered master rank monsters. Now a lot of these end game monsters are very capable of one-shotting you or at least leaving you with 10% health after a hit. And the issue is, if you have any loss in survivability, that hit that would leave you at 10% instead kills you. And the end game is the grinding lands, and after a few hours of grinding through, your consistency with your ability to avoid damage starts to go down. But how much damage do you actually start to take if you run one high rank piece instead? Well, because this is an endgame build, we're looking at about 190 armor per piece when fully upgraded and augmented. 190 times 5 plus an extra 30 from the armor, talent, and charm leaves you at 980 defense. Running the Kaiser Gamma helmet drops you by roughly 100 defense. So not running the Kaiser Gamma helmet gives you 187.5 extra effective health, which is a 10.42% increase in effective health. In other words, you're taking roughly 10 to 11% more damage to gain one more agitator on the build. But okay, don't get hit and you can run this build instead, so how much damage does this actually gain us? Well, having agitator 4 on the build has 741.048 EFR, agitator 5 has 748.44. This is a 0.9975% EFR increase, yes, not even 1%. Also, you could just slot in the agitator on your mantles instead, because this set is so efficient, you actually can't fit extra skills on mantles to get any higher other than one attack boost. So yeah, we don't consider this set worth running, but I do apologize because we should have mentioned it in the last video and explained why we weren't including the build in the video. In future metaset videos, I will try to be more forward about why we aren't including certain sets. Now for the fun part, let's talk about Hellish Slasher. Now just to reiterate, I am not telling you not to use Hellish Slasher. It is a game, play whatever weapons you enjoy because you're supposed to enjoy yourself. However, in stream chat, in comments in other videos, in the Discord server and other Discord servers I'm a part of on Twitter, we have just seen so many claims about how good Hellish Slasher is that are markedly untrue. Toon and I despise misinformation, so let's go ahead and dismantle these. And of course, forewarning, there will be a lot of numbers and calculations to dismantle all of these and show that Hellish Slasher is not only worse than 1, not 2, but 3 longswords.
She's my...
Hellish Slasher.
She is number 4
Longsword.
in all of...
Iceborne. Okay, so first, how this is going to work is I'm going to cover one by one the various different arguments for Hellish Slasher I've seen, and then after that we're going to do a step-by-step comparison of Hellish Slasher against the other options at every stage in the game. So, first thing I've seen a lot is just that it is blanket the best endgame longsword. This is completely untrue, it's not even top 3 best longswords in the game. There are 3 other longswords that are significantly better than it is in every situation. We've already covered 2 of those, the Shara longsword as well as the Goldrathian longsword, which is the best weapon in every single situation in the game. But the third option that still also beats the Hellish Slasher is the Runa Nergigante longsword. And technically, the Acid Glavenus longsword is better, but you have to play like a robot because you only get 10 units of purple sharpness or Master's Touch, so I'm not gonna count that one. And technically, there is a Zora Magdaros longsword build that potentially can beat every other option, but I need to do a lot more math on that before I say anything definitive. I will get a bit more in depth into the weapon by weapon build comparisons in just a second. The next point I've been hearing a lot is it's the best comfy longsword. Now, what comfy is extremely subjective, but in an attempt to be objective, I'm going to try to break it down into individual points that kind of total to being comfy. Now, my assumption on this is that comfy means sharpness not running out. It also means being able to run other builds, so if you don't want to run Master's Touch, you can run like the Free Meal Secret or something. And maybe also the ability to fit in defensive or quality of life skills. So let's start with fitting in defensive or quality of life skills. So in my opinion, this is a moot point in Master rank. As long as you are running level 4 deco slots in your armor, which most of the armor has level 4 deco slots, you have the ability to easily fit in defensive skills. You can very easily just slot in combo decos, or hell, just drop an agitator from your build to throw in a health boost 2 deco. Due to the nature of 4-slot skills, it's very easy to fit in defensive skills now while losing little if not no damage. But Hellish Slasher does get a level 4 slot instead of other slots, so it is technically better if you want to be fitting in more level 4 decos for defensive skills. This generally works out to getting maybe 1 extra defensive skill in your build, but it does have that. Alright, next up let's talk about sharpness. So the Runa Nergigante has 100 units of white, the Hellish Slasher has 80, and the Goldrathian has 60. Now the Hellish Slasher does have 20 more units than the Goldrathian, but here's the thing, 60 units of white is plenty. That extra 20 units is not going to be the difference between deciding to run a Razor Sharp Charm or not, or running Master's Touch or not. So yes, it does hit higher sharpness than the Goldrathian, but it doesn't really matter in our opinion. And if you really care about having that much sharpness, the Runa Nerg will have even more white sharpness and do more damage. And in terms of flexible builds, well, the Golden Rathian weapon not only has around the same sharpness, but also it gets poison damage. If you are not running a high EFR Master's Touch set, you get more value out of poison than raw damage, which makes the Golden Rathian better for flexible non-Master's Touch sets than the Slasher, and the Runa Nerg with its 100 units of natural white sharpness is the best for flexible sets. So the Slasher loses to the Runa Nergigante for having more sharpness on a flexible set, and the Golden Rathian is better if you want to have more damage on a flexible set. However, the Hellish Slasher is more comfortable than the Shara Longsword for sure. The Shara Longsword cannot function without Master's Touch, and even with a full build only gets 30 units of purple sharpness. Now again, comfiness is subjective, but at least based on all these points, there is a better option for all the aspects of comfiness, except that Slasher gets a level 4 slot. But with the amount of level 4 slots we already have, you can already fit so many quality of life skills that to me it feels like overkill. Now the next thing I've been hearing about is that it's better in multiplayer, which I don't believe to be the case. Now multiplayer does come with its own unique challenges. So first off, in multiplayer monsters move around a lot more, meaning damage uptime is difficult. And it also means it's harder to constantly attack weak points. Not hitting weak points means you're dealing less damage, and also means that you're losing sharpness because you're critting less with Master's Touch. This gives us 2 unique issues. One is damage uptime on weak points, and the other is going to be sharpness issues. So first off, the Gold Rathian weapon hits higher affinity at base than the other options do. This means you're going to crit more often if you're not hitting weak points or not hitting softened weak points. Now yes, it does have 20 less units than the Hellish Slasher, but with 65% affinity and 60 units of white sharpness, it takes you 171 hits on average to hit blue. Now especially with a multiplayer monster Kel being about, the chance you'll hit it 171 times before it either dies or moves to another area without hitting any weak points is pretty low. Again, the Hellish Slasher does have 20 more units of white sharpness, but that's not a huge advantage. 60 units of white sharpness is plenty. Now the Hellish Slasher does also get the same plus 10% affinity with an affinity augment, but then you also have to grind Guiding Lance materials with tempered and whatnot in order to get the augments going. And Runa no Gigante doesn't care about sharpness. So assuming that you don't want to run a Master's Touch or a Razor Sharp build and you still don't think 60 units is going to be enough sharpness for you, just use the Runa no Gigante longsword instead. Admittedly though, the Shara longsword can struggle more in multiplayer just because of the lower amount of sharpness it has. But 30 units is still pretty good if you can play fairly cleanly. However, if you do not feel like that 30 units is enough, you can switch to the Hellish Slasher at least until you get the Golden Rathian longsword. And on the point of dealing damage, the Gold Rathian longsword is relatively speaking even better in multiplayer than it is in solo. And there are two reasons for this, one is a play reason and one is a numbers reason. Now the play reason why this is better is simply because poison gets better the lower your DPS uptime is, and in multiplayer monsters can be around more and you get to hit them less. So because you have lower DPS uptime, your poison deals a higher percentage of your total damage. The numbers reason is because monsters do not scale 1-to-1 with number of players in the quest. Now we haven't double checked to see what the new 4-player and 2-player values are for health, but we know they're not a 1-to-1 increase. This means that if we assume everyone in the hunting party deals equivalent damage to the monster, the percentage of damage you have to deal to kill the monster is lower than in solo. This means the percentage of the total damage you've dealt poison has to make up is even lower compared to how it is in solo play. So for the first thing, you are likely to get around the same amount of poison procs per hunt in solo as you do in multiplayer. The reason for this is that status thresholds scale with every subsequent status. In other words, it's much harder to get a 4th poison, then a 3rd poison, then a 2nd poison, then the 1st poison. Now there are way too many factors to account for to give you accurate numbers on yes, you will get a 3rd poison or a 4th poison in this situation. But generally getting a 4th poison is about 2.5 to maybe 4 times as difficult as getting the 1st poison. And status thresholds don't really scale that much with multiplayer. Now because of how difficult it is to get that 4th or 5th poison, if you were to get 3 poisons in a solo hunt, the chance you would not get 3 poisons in multiplayer is fairly unlikely. There's also the advantage that status doesn't care where you hit a monster, it just cares that you hit them. So you not hitting a weak point doesn't change how much damage poison is going to do, but it does change how much damage your raw damage is going to do. TLDR, poison's really good in multiplayer. So yeah, the Gold Rathian LS is undoubtedly the best option for multiplayer. Now there is the case that if you have multiple poison weapons on your team, then your poison becomes weaker, and that is true. But this is mostly inconsequential because of the fact that the EFR difference between the Gold Rathian longsword and other longswords with the same build is going to be around 1% less for the Gold Rathian maybe. Now there are way too many factors to account for to figure out exactly how much worse poison is if you're running 4 poison weapons on your team. But with the fact that it's only a 1% damage difference it has to make up with poison, it's going to end up being better. So yeah, in multiplayer the only one you could really consider worse would probably be the Shara longsword. And again, that is assuming you cannot maintain 30 units of purple sharpness with Master's Touch in multiplayer. If you are comfortable with 30 units of sharpness with Master's Touch in multiplayer, the Shara longsword will hit harder. Now another thing I've heard is that you can get it earlier game than these other top longswords like Gold Rathian. This is true, but the Shara longsword is better until you get access to MR70 when you can get peak performance and a health augment into your slasher build, but at that point Gold Rathian beats it. So this is kind of a moot point. Another thing I've heard is that it's the best to run through the whole game. This is also not really true, at least in my opinion. The Shara longsword would be better if you wanted to not run Gold Rathian for some reason, which I don't understand because it's disgustingly strong. We'll get more into this, but basically the Shara longsword beats the Hellish Slasher at every point in the game except for this one window. There is a point before you hit Master Rank 100 where with a peak performance set and a health augment and an affinity augment, the Hellish Slasher does beat the Shara. But this is only the case if the Hellish Slasher runs a peak performance set with a health augment which you have to farm up after MR70. And I know I'm talking about only running one longsword through the whole game, but the Gold Rathian also beats this build. Assuming that you don't want to run a peak build, then the Shower is going to be better through the entire game for you to run anyway if you don't want to just use the Golden Rathian longsword because it's so strong. And then another argument I've heard is you can get a health augment on it earlier. This is actually a very fair point because you can get the health augment post MR70, while for the R12 weapons you have to wait until MR100. Only problem with this is that at this point you're mostly farming tempered monsters, and tempered monsters will still two-shot you with or without health augments. Most tempered monsters, after you get hit, you generally have to heal up or you're in one-shot range for a good amount of time, even with a health augment healing you. But this is a fair point, the Hellish Slasher can get a health augment sooner into the game than you can with the other options. And then finally, what I see mentioned a lot is that because it can get non-elemental boost and because it can get an infinity augment, it's therefore better. Now, this is technically true. You can run non-elemental boost, and both the Runner Gigante weapon as well as the Gold Rathian weapon cannot. But let's do some quick maths. So the base true raw of Hellish Slasher is 280. Now, you may not know this, but non-elemental boost only affects base true raw. It does not multiply your attack boost, your food buffs, any of that. This means that when we slot in the non-elemental boost into Hellish Slasher, we get 294 true raw. Now, the base true raw of both Runner Gigante as well as Gold Rathian longsword is 290. This puts the Hellish Slasher at 4 more true raw than these two options, not bad. Except we used up a level 2 slot to make this happen, and we can also put an agitator into a level 2 slot, and that gives us 4 true raw plus some affinity. And due to Clutch Claw wall knocking mechanics, the enrage uptime of monsters is close to 95%. So yeah, for the exact same build efficiency, the Runner Gigante longsword and the Gold Rathian longsword can hit the exact same raw plus get some affinity out of it. Oh, and they get poison and dragon damage. Now, unlike the Rarity 12 weapons, the Hellish Slasher can get both a health augment and an affinity augment, so that 10% more affinity does give it a slight advantage over the Runner Gigante weapon. Now, the Runner Gigante weapon does also get even more damage skills in its build because it doesn't have the Remaster's Touch, but more on that in a sec. But if we look at the Gold Rathian longsword, it already has 10% affinity. So you're essentially investing farming time and resources into augmenting a longsword so that it can hit the same affinity and the same true raw as an already better longsword that also gets poison damage. Alright, now that we've covered all of those points, let's go ahead and look at how strong the Hellish Slasher actually is numerically through every point in the game. So there are 3 builds we have to worry about for the Hellish Slasher. One that you have pre-Master Rank 70, one you have post-Master Rank 70 to Master Rank 100, and one post-Master Rank 100. Let's go chronologically, so we'll start with the pre-Master Rank 70. So here is our Hellish Slasher pre-Master Rank 70. Now we can't get access to the Brute Tigrex chest until after Master Rank 70, so instead we're using the Karen chest here. Now the actual attack charm is supposed to be an attack charm 3, you cannot get an attack boost 4 charm until much later in the game. Unfortunately, the builder for Iceborne is still in beta, so the best we have right now, but basically this is attack boost 4, not attack boost 5. This build is otherwise very standard. If you don't have challengers / vitality or whatever decos, just slot in agitator decos. If you don't have those, slot in whatever critical or tenderizer or whatever combo decos you have. Again, I go for vitality combo decos, not quick sheath combo decos, because I really don't think that 1/6 of a second realistically makes that much of a difference on the EI slash. But I could be wrong, so use whatever you prefer. Okay, so with all of these skills accounted for, plus also the food and item buffs included as well for EFR calculations, on this pre-Master Rank 70 build, we hit 707.784 EFR on softened weak points, and we hit 67.4505 on non-softened weak points. Now let's compare this to the Shara build we had in the previous video. So because the Shara build has to run Handicraft, it only gets 4 attack boosts and 1 agitator. This puts the EFR on softened weak points at 714.182, and on non-softened weak points 673.3716. This is essentially the same EFR both on and off of softened weak points, so in terms of damage they are effectively the same. However, you can farm Shara weapons much sooner than you can the Hellish Slasher, and fairly easily too if you follow our Shara guide. There are also quite a few monster parts in Master Rank, especially in endgame, that you will bounce on if you hit them with white sharpness but not with purple. But yeah, at this point, Shara does technically win by a hair, but they are very close. Post MR70 is when things get interesting. So for the Hellish Slasher, it's going to look even worse post MR70 until you get a health augment on your weapon. Once you have a health augment on your Hellish Slasher, it enables you to use a peak performance build, which is the point in time where it can kind of compete with some of the other options. Also, again, this is supposed to be an Agitator 3 charm here. You cannot get an Agitator 4 until post MR100, so the actual Agitator level is 3. We are also assuming you don't have guard decos at this point in the game, so that's why there's no double attack deco in there. And finally, this set does run an affinity augment because you cannot fit an attack augment onto it instead, so it just gives us the extra affinity for non-weak points. Now for EFR, with peak active on softened weak points, we hit 737.352 EFR. On non-softened weak points, that's 720.4982 EFR, and without peak active, it's 700.392 EFR on softened weak points and 684.38 on non-softened. Okay, that's a lot of numbers, but what does that all mean? Well, let's compare it to the Gold Rathian, which is what you should be running as soon as you hit MR70. So let's compare the new Slasher build with peak performance to the Gold Rathian set we covered earlier in the meta set section. So when the Hellish Slasher hits softened weak points, it does 2.6% more damage than the Gold Rathian does. And when you have peak active and you are hitting non-softened weak points, you only do 1.71% more damage than the Gold Rathian set does. And keep in mind, this is with peak active. With peak not active, it does 2.67% less damage than the Gold Rathian does on softened weak points, and 3.57% less on non-softened weak points. That means in order for Hellish Slasher to deal the same amount of damage as the Gold Rathian Longsword, you have to have at least 50% uptime on peak if you're hitting softened weak points. And you need over 70% uptime on your peak if you're hitting non-softened weak points. Now, hitting these breakpoints may be just a matter of play better forehead, but also every time you EI slash, you take chip damage. Meaning that your EI Spirit Slash does not get any peak on it, and it's one of your harder hitting moves. And that doesn't even account for poison. Assuming a monster is 1 star weak to poison, it takes you about 3 poison procs to match that 2.6 DPS increase coming from the peak set, assuming Hellish Slasher has 100% uptime, which is impossible to do if you ever use EIE attacks. At 2 star weak, you only need less than 2 poison procs to match that damage increase. And at a 3 star weakness, you don't even need a single full duration poison to match that DPS increase. And again, this assumes you have 100% peak uptime because you play like a robot and you never get hit or take chip damage. Just use the Gold Rathian Longsword if you care about damage. Also, in case you're wondering how many procs you can actually get in a run, well, in this very clean run Rainy has in the background, he got 3 total poison procs. And keep in mind, this is a 548 Runa no Gigante. Slower runs get more poison procs. You cannot apply poison while one is active on the monster, meaning that if your run is cleaner, you get less procs. But at least on this run here, still getting 3 with a very clean run. But now, assuming you don't want to use the Gold Rathian Longsword, let's compare it to what an equivalent mid-endgame build would look like on the Shara Longsword. So again, this is a Handicraft 3 charm, not a Handicraft 4 charm, because you can't get that until MR100. This set is exactly the same, it literally just gains 1 attack boost because we have the Brute Tigrex chest. Now, if we compare the EFR of the Slasher versus this other Shara set, with peak active on softened weak points, it's a 1.38% EFR increase for the Slasher, as well as a 5.07% increase on non-softened weak points with peak active, so that's actually fairly significant. However, with peak not active on the Slasher build, the Shara is going to have a 3.9% increase in EFR on softened weak points and a 0.25% on non-softened. So this means on non-softened weak points, you need less than 5% uptime on peak to beat the Shara with the Slasher. However, you need over 75% uptime on your peak for the Slasher to beat Shara on softened weak points. This is really the only point in the game at which a Slasher actually can beat something else, because if you play cleanly and make sure you have high peak uptime, you can beat the Shara with the Slasher. However, the Slasher is still weaker than the Gold Rathian, and at this point farming the Gold Rathian would take you much less time than farming up a health and affinity augment for your Slasher. Now this is by far the Slasher's strongest point during the progression, and it only gets downhill from here. Gold Rathian beats it now and will continue to beat it in pretty much every facet. It works in pretty much just as flexible a build. It will beat it in damage at every single point. In optimal sets, in less optimal sets, in fully defensive and utility sets, it'll still deal more damage than the Slasher. And the Slasher does have slightly more natural white sharpness than the Gold Rathian, but they both have enough that you can run non-Master's Touch builds and generally be fine. And also once you hit past MR 100, Runa no Gigante just does that better anyway. So now we know that Gold Rathian is just better than Slasher, but for Shara post MR 100, let's see what the optimal build looks like. At this point, Shara has all the bells and whistles. You can throw a health augment on there if you'd like for survivability. We did not include any augments in here just to see what it would look like at base. Now let's compare that to the Hellish Slasher endgame build, which essentially gains 1 agitator and 1 attack boost. Again, this does assume you have an attack boost to Deco, but we're going with endgame optimal sets here. So if we look at the EFR with this set for the Slasher, it's 742.896 with peak active on softened weak points. On non-softened weak points, 725.915. As for the Shara endgame set, on softened weak points, 743.372 EFR, and 705.14 EFR on non-softened weak points. This essentially means that the Slasher deals with peak active 0.6% less damage on softened weak points and 2.95% more damage on softened weak points. The only problem is this is with peak active, it drops significantly if peak is not active, meaning if you get hit once during the hunt, Shara will most likely be better. Which means if you want to use EIE slashes, you probably should not use the Slasher. The reason why the Gold Rathian set can justify running peak is because the poison does make up for some of the peak uptime loss, but the Slasher has nothing to make up for that loss of peak, which means the Shara Longsword you can get sooner, it deals more damage before MR 70, it only deals slightly less damage if you play well and do not lose peak that often after MR 70 until MR 100, at which point Shara is better again. Which means that, at least in my opinion, unless you want to run the Gold Rathian Longsword, which you should because it's broken, if you wanted to run one longsword through the entire game for some reason, the Shara Longsword is simply better for a larger percentage of time. Anyway, at this point, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with a pack of wild cougars, so we're gonna wrap things up. But suffice to say, the Gold Rathian beats the Shara, and the Shara is, at least in my opinion, better than the Slasher. Runa no Gigante hits higher EFR than the Slasher can, but it's also a peak set just like the others without the poison damage Gold Rathian has, so in my opinion at least, Gold Rathian and probably also Shara are better. However, the strength of the Runa no Gigante Longsword is that it is the most flexible and comfy in the game. You can throw it on any build with no handicraft, razor sharp or anything and be fine. At every point in the game, there are 3 longswords that are better than Hellish Slasher. There is only 2 points in which it is better than only one of these 3. The first case is pre-MR 70 if you want to run a non-Master's Touch build. Hellish Slasher has enough white sharpness to get away with running razor sharp on a non-Master's Touch set. On the other hand, Shara does deal more damage, but Shara does require Master's Touch to function. However, post MR 70, if you want to run a non-Master's Touch set, the Gold Rathian Longsword is just better for that. Now at this point, post MR 70 is the other time that the Shara technically loses to the Slasher. Assuming you have high peak uptime and you have also farmed up an affinity and health augment for your Slasher, you will just barely beat the Shara in damage. But again, Gold Rathian's better. Outside of those 2 scenarios, the Slasher just doesn't compete with these other options. But you know, if you enjoy the way it looks, because it is a really pretty longsword, and you enjoy using it, keep using it. But please stop saying it's the best longsword, or the comfiest longsword, or any of these #1 longsword categorical things, because I just spent 28 minutes showing you numerically that it isn't. Thank you. As always, thank you so much for checking out the video, and if you made it all the way here, thank you even more so, because this turned out to be way longer of a video essay than I expected. And if you know anyone who is still calling the Slasher the best longsword in the game, share this video with them. And if you learned something new, and I really hope you did because there was a lot of math in this video, be sure to like the video and let us know in the comment below. And a huge thank you to Rainy for letting me use his footage of his Runa no Gigante TA longsword run as the background footage for this video. Rainy is a phenomenal longsword and charge blade speedrunner, and you should definitely go check out his channel. And like I said, he's planning on dunking this Runa no Gigante run with a proper Master's Touch meta set, so make sure you subscribe to his channel so you can see that as soon as it comes out. And of course, a huge thank you to Honey over at honeyhunterworld.com for creating and maintaining the tools we use to make sets with. The beta Iceborne builder is inching closer and closer to being ready, and we cannot be more excited. And if you're looking for hunters to hunt with or just chat about stuff, be sure to check out our Discord server, the Mathless Nest. We do have Iceborne specific channels to make sure that people who don't want spoilers can avoid them. And don't forget, we do have a Twitter where we post updates about videos and just various memes we make, as well as a Twitch where Tuna does stream almost every single day. And of course, none of this would be possible without the generosity of our patrons. And an especially big thank you to our new patrons, Birdlord and HCCS. Your support really does mean the world to us, and it helps drive us to always be our best, to always do our best, and sometimes it drives us to make 30-minute video essays talking about why the community's misconceptions about a particular weapon are incorrect. Okay, I think that is it officially for this video, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you hit the notification bell, then YouTube lets you know as soon as things happen that we put out on YouTube. Well, my butt has fallen asleep in this chair and I need a drink, so I'm out. Happy hunting, hunters. Bye.